Good evening, folks. Welcome to the September 7th virtual community meeting. We're running a few minutes late today. As you guys know, it's been a busy day for Sheriff Smith, and he is walking in the door now. We're going to get him mic'd up, and we'll start in just a few minutes. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the September 7th virtual community meeting for the Cameron Peak Fire. My name is Don Sanchez. I'm a fire information officer with Rocky Mountain Team Black. We're going to start tonight with the current acreage of the fire. The fire was last mapped a couple hours ago at 96,462 acres, and we're currently at 4% contained. Tonight, our speakers are going to be Corey Modis from an incident meteorologist from the National Weather Service. Then we're going to have Boyd Labita, our fire behavior analyst with Team Black. Then we're going to have John Tytrin, our operations section chief for the NEMO team. Then we're going to have Katie Donahue, who is a district ranger for the Canyon Lakes Ranger District for the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest and Pawnee National Grasslands. Then we're going to have Sheriff Justin Smith from the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. And following Sheriff Smith is going to be Chuck Russell, who is our deputy incident commander for the NEMO team. And if you guys can go ahead and put questions into the comments. When Chuck Russell is done, we will do a question and answer session with you guys, and we'll be able to open up for questions. And for those questions, we will also have Darla Seidels from Rocky Mountain National Park. She will be here to answer questions. She'll actually be virtual to answer those questions. And we'll also have Jay Usher, who is another one of our operations section chief. And with that, we will go to Corey Modis.
Good evening, Corey Motice. I'm an incident meteorologist trainee on the fire. So first I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about what happened the last few days that we saw all this fire activity. It was sunny. We had temperatures out in the mid 80s on the fire. It was very dry with relative humidities down in the single digits. And we had a lot of wind gusting to around 40 miles an hour or so each day. But the good news is we just had a front move through. It's switching the winds around. It's bringing in a lot more moisture. We're seeing some good recoveries already on the fire. And we're going to see a lot of moisture move in overnight and through the day tomorrow. So the current forecast, we're going 8 to 16 inches of snow across the entire fire area. That's going to be about an inch to an inch and a half of liquid precipitation. Temperatures are going to get significantly colder. We're looking at lows tonight in the 20s out on the fire. Single digit wind chills. Tomorrow, the highs are going to remain in the 20s. And then just a very slow, gradual warm up as we head through the rest of the week. So this cold weather is going to be here for a few days, and it's going to be just a slow warm up as we head into next weekend. So we have a lot of moisture out there coming tonight on the fire.
Thanks, Corey. Boyd Labita, fire behavior analyst for Team Black. Glad you're viewing tonight. It's been a remarkable day. We've seen a considerable amount of dangerous fire behavior today. The conditions Corey just described that we've been under for the last 3 days have really just allowed fire to just take advantage of that and just move around in some ways and in some fuel types that we just haven't seen it do in this place. So Yeah, we know a lot of people are impacted, and it's dangerous. We're really concerned about how fire can move. We're informed by some of the past fires in this area that have made really dramatic moves, like the High Park fire, 12 miles in a 24-hour period. Crystal Fire in 2011 moved 4 miles at nighttime. Fern Lake Fire burned in about a 4-mile run at nighttime in December. So it's not just somewhere else that fire can be dangerous. It's here, and that happened today, and it happened through the weekend and today. So let me give you a little backdrop about what did happen today on the fire. We saw really significant growth on the fire. If you heard the acreage figure, really dramatic growth on that. Let's see. What we started out with was a footprint of the fire that had moved from over in the Big South, the south fork of the Poudre, to the Pingree Park Road at the end of yesterday. It had set up there, and we knew we were going to have another day of really high winds out of the west, and we were poised to see movement to the east on that. Through the day, though, we did have those winds, and they developed, and there was certainly fire activity. But as far as eastern spread, did not happen all that much, and that's largely because it was bumping the High Park fire footprint. The Pingree Road is here, and that was the western edge of High Park. And we did see fire advance into that today, but not significant, and it did not move in there. So the High Park fire held us for the most part, and but we did see real significant movement of the fire in a flanking manner. It backed, in a sense, down to the river off of there, and that was the bulk of the smoke and pyrocumulus column we saw today was fire backing off the ridge, the rim of the Poudre Canyon, down to the river. And that's basically where it's at tonight. We expect it to check up there and pause there as the weather pattern changes and we get the precipitation on it. Late today, we saw a significant activity on the north side of the river there, and it made its move into Roaring Creek, which is at Kinnick, and that is a confluence of two pretty distinct drainages, and where there's lots of fuel. So that made a real prominent punch of fire behavior and smoke and activity that was pushing north. And we have not seen the fire push north since those very early days of it. So that was a definite concern for us, and actions were taken based on that. Let me move back around to the fire. So the one place that it did cross the Pingree Road was in the Monument Gulch area down to the Pinnock Pass area. So that was a feature we used in the High Park fire to check movement of that fire to the south and west. And that's where the Cameron Peak fire moved into that area. So at this time, it's largely held up in that area, did not move dramatically down into the Buckhorn, which was also a concern. Westerly winds moved it from the Browns Lake area across Fish Creek and down to the Pingree Road. We also saw fire move Peterson Lake into the Comanche Peak Wilderness, which is way far away from any of the values we're concerned about, so not so much of a concern there. Fire in Rocky Mountain National Park, it made a significant movement into the backcountry, the wilderness of the park yesterday, and today did some additional action down there and got established somewhat into the South Fork of the Cache la Poudre River there, but didn't move very far, is not still quite a ways from Trail Ridge Road or the Visitor Center or being able to get into the Big Thompson watershed. So we saw a real dramatic movement, fantastic, huge growth of the fire in today. So tomorrow, as of course you'd expect with precipitation like that, it's going to park the fire where it's at. So we won't see movement on the fire tomorrow or many days beyond that. But it would be premature to say the fire's out or that it's over. There's just too many things that we're going to have to live through and experience to be able to say that. One of them is how much snow we really get. and how quickly it warms up and dries out, which is inevitable. This weather event that we're experiencing is unusually early and unusually cold and wet. The fall here, our climatology is for a dry, warm, long fall. And so the snow will go quickly, and we will be looking for heat at the places that it might be able to come alive again. So that's just not over, I'm sorry to say, but it's a great blessing to us to be able to get this precipitation and check up the fire where it's at. I think that's all I'll say for now. I'd be glad to answer questions later. I'll hand it over to operations.
Hey, good evening, everyone. John Titron, Operations Section Chief. I want to give you a rundown on what happened today operationally. So we knew yesterday was a dynamic day. We had a lot of fire spread yesterday. For the most part, that fire remained in the boxes, in the lines that we had been working on to establish. We also knew that those lines were going to get challenged today with the forecast we had. Yesterday, we talked about at the public meeting, the Pingree Road, and that we were going to be making a stand on Pingree Road. So those actions were going on last night. We had some successes on Pingree. However, the fire did eventually come across. Knowing that we were going to have such a dynamic day today, it's not a day for offense. So when we have these kind of weather conditions, it puts us completely on defense, where our number one priorities are life, safety, and the protection of property. So as we moved into this operation today, we reached out to the state, and through our mutual aid agreement, we ordered 50 additional fire engines to come in strike team formation and assist us with structure protection that we knew was going to be going on today. We knew we were going to be challenged, so we staffed up accordingly. In addition, the forest loaned us some additional engines, and so we had an additional task force and strike team pre-positioned for additional structure protection as needed. So we were staffed up throughout the day for what was occurring. Kind of chronologically with the events that we dealt with today, we did get fire across Pingree Road. We were expecting a hard push with those strong west winds throughout the day. It was definitely a firefight down here, trying to keep that contained where it was and do the structure protection. However, it stopped short here of the Buckhorn Ranger District down here on Buckhorn Road. So that's actually a good thing. It didn't spread nearly as far east as we thought it would. It did cross our line, so we know that that's going to give us some challenges moving forward. But what we saw of it moving into the old High Park fire gave us some hope. It didn't want to move. It did check up, so that was a good, that was a positive in what was occurring. The other big activity was this long finger of fire along the Poudre Canyon, along the Highway 14 corridor, did flank all the way down to Highway 14. And that presented a lot of structure protection challenges throughout the day. And so we've been rolling strike team after strike team of engine up there to support that operation. And that's been going well so far throughout the day. Again, so far for the most of 14 corridor, we've kept it south, with the exception of the finger that was already north of 14 back here at Kinnicknick. And that did move out here at the end of the evening. But again, that is still within in our control features there on the north side. So that's still okay for where we're at. There was some room for the fire to move up there. And so far, no major issues with that. The other thing that was challenging us today was the wind. So we looked early at the options of using aircraft, and we're just outside the operational limits of being able to fly aircraft on the fire. So that was hampered. We were able to get the multi-mission aircraft up at high elevation where they could operate to provide us intelligence. But as far as the low-flying aircraft at over 40-mile-an-hour winds, it just isn't operationally safe to have the aircraft in there. So that was further hampering things. The good news is, with the weather coming in, that's going to give us the opportunity over the next several days to go from a defensive posture back to an offensive posture. So we have some lines established. up here on the north side that we'll be working on. We are holding the 14 corridor. We did have fire across Pingree, so this is going to be one of our focus areas here in the very near future to start looking at opportunities of how we'll pick this piece up. But again, on the north side, we're still back out to our existing lines and still in good shape up there. For the most part, we were focused on a lot of potential down off here on the east side, even as far south as Glen Haven with these winds switching around to the northeast. And we did move some engines up into the Glen Haven area as well. But overall, we were fortunate that the spread there on the east side was not as potentially bad as it could have been. So the biggest spread was just filling in that long finger from yesterday from Pingree back up to the 14 corridor. So I think I'll end there and be ready to answer questions. Thanks.
I'm Katie Donahue with the U.S. Forest Service. Throughout this incident, I think I've been here speaking with you about how we're trying to balance the multiple priorities of folks that want to use the forest and also the needs of the incident. And I think I just want to emphasize what everyone else has said today, that today was a really extreme day, and yesterday was as well. And that really just heightened our focus on life, safety, and protection of property. As such, for folks who've been using the National Forest, we did make some changes to what I said last night. We did expand our closure areas. So we did move down all the way to the Big Thompson Canyon for closures for recreation, and then also out to the northeast as well, and also out in the Redfeather area as well, out to the end of the Boy Scout Road. So we had several campgrounds that were open yesterday. We evacuated folks last night. I really appreciate the orderly evacuation of campers last night. I know it was getting into the evening, but I'm very grateful that folks saw the importance of needing to clear out of there and make space for the firefighters and other folks really engaged in dealing with that extreme fire to have the space to work safely in there. So thanks to all of those who were cooperative with that effort. We are going to continue to see these closures in place tomorrow, and the weather we're looking at it really as a pause. We are planning ahead aggressively for what comes after that. We know that this fire is very likely to wake back up, has been mentioned by others, and we're working with the team to try and get ready for that. So please expect that those restrictions on use on National Forest will continue into the foreseeable future while we see where the fire goes. Thank you.
Good evening, Justin Smith, your Larimer County Sheriff. What I want to address are the increase in evacuations that we covered and talk a little bit about structures. You got some very good overviews of what the fire's done, so I'll not readdress those, but I'll talk a little bit of how those behaviors impacted our decisions on pulling triggers on evacuations. One thing I do want to say up front is there have been a significant number of changes in the voluntary and mandatory evacuations today. So when you're putting in questions, I'm not going to be in a position to be able to really answer specifics on those different areas because they've changed many times today. What I'll encourage you to do if you have specific questions on where the evacuations are or aren't, go to nocoalert.org and it will list all of those out. So as I talked about the fire behavior that really impacted some of our decisions, you know, one of the things when I was here yesterday afternoon and we discussed the voluntaries up in Crystal Lakes and Redfeather, and the question came out, what about Glacier View? And I told you in all sincerity, at that point, there was not an evacuation request going out directly on our radar. However, within an hour or less of that, conditions had changed. And to give you a little overview of that, that's because of the fire behavior in here. When it moved up to Pingree Park Road, one of the concerns that was expressed by the team on the fire behavior is it had the potential to run down where the fuel was right along the Pingree Park Road. And for everybody who was here or knows of what happened during High Park, we had a bad wind to the north that jumped it over the Poudre Canyon. And in a matter of minutes, we had it up into Glacier View. Having that experience as we sat down and talked about it, knowing that fire had the potential to turn to the north. We made that decision yesterday to put Glacier View in those evacuations. So that's what triggered the Glacier View area up through here. And then as we talk about the fire coming up by Connect, that was what brought us up. It hit a trigger point for Crystal and Redfeather to go from voluntary to mandatory evacuations, because we know the potential, as we saw the fire run across here, how quickly that could happen, how quickly we got here up in Monument Gulch area, that getting into Redfeather could happen very quickly. So we didn't want to wait till it was too late to make that notification. So that's why those went mandatory. And then the last one are the areas down here around Glen Haven that did go into voluntary today, and that was later in the evening. In fact, those are being put in place right now. We have deputies. We're actually so short. Boulder County sent deputies up, so they're assisting. And we're going along, as we talked yesterday, Dunraven Glade, the retreat, everything along County Road 43 back down to Drake, I believe, double check on NOCO alert on the specifics, and then all the way up to Glen Haven. And I believe, again, that's to the bottom of the switchbacks, but double check. And with that one, it's still voluntary. And the concern with that comes back to that finger that came out and came across Pennock Pass, was just the potential with, even though we have this snow and cold coming in, I just came off the fire. There was a lot of swirling winds up there, and there were some serious and legitimate concerns about spotting, even in the conditions we have tonight. And if it jumped down, the fire behavior folks had expressed the potential for that to get down south. So we went ahead and pulled that trigger again, not pulling triggers on these that we don't believe are absolutely necessary. And then last, and I hate to say it, but essentially everything west of Fort Collins and the zones up here around Risk Canyon, because again, what we looked at today was the potential for that to run all the way down the Buckhorn, knowing what happened on the other side of the fire in the last 24 to 48 hours. Absolutely realistic for the potential of it running all the way down. And if it had gotten down to Stove Prairie Road, it would have been a whole nother game, and we would have been into these areas again. As challenging as that is, and certainly we understand for residents, we just don't want to put you in a situation. We said, well, maybe we should have done that before. So definitely some caution in there, but that's where we're at on the evacuations. I don't know of any others that are in the works as far as voluntary or mandatory currently. What I do want to also address is structures. That's the part that really becomes most concern to the community here as this fire gets to areas where we have structures and private property. And as you can see, where it crossed into Monument Gulch, I was at Jack's Gulch yesterday as it was starting that run across. And today we had, as the fire crews were doing their job, we had Larimer County Emergency Services specialists getting into those areas to look at what it was doing and to work with the fire crews that were up there. And I cannot give you numbers, but I do have to share with you that I know some structures were lost in Monument Gulch, and we will get back in there just as soon as we safely can to determine what those are. One of the reasons I was late was I was meeting up beyond Rustic with one of the individuals who was up there, gave me those direct confirmations. It was important to me to be able to get that in as timely manner as possible. One of the challenges, obviously the snow is going to be up in there tomorrow, but even more of a challenge for us is that there's trees falling in the road, and so they can't even physically get up into the area currently. So as soon as we can safely get up there, we'll start figuring out what structures were damaged or lost, and we will get that information out in a very timely manner. And then the other area that's very relevant, they talked about the fire moving down towards Rustic. Again, I was up there today as it came in, and some tremendous work with the structure folks that are up there. I have unconfirmed reports of some potential damage in that area of Rustic. I can't share with you anything specific because we don't have it, but I think just as importantly is I can share with you that the vast majority of structures up there are standing, they're good, they were protected. Those fire crews are still up there working actively in that area. In fact, I got up to just around Big South before I came down, and definitely you could see how active the fire was back in here. but the crews continue to work those structures. I'm not aware of any lost or damaged structures further up on 14. Again, the potential of a few in Rustic, nothing else that comes up on the north. And yes, unfortunately, we do know there are some damaged or destroyed structures in Monument Gulch, and we're going to assess that as soon as we can. Other than that, no other structures or at least structures that have been damaged or destroyed that we're aware of. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Chuck Russell, Deputy IC on the Incident Management Team. Wanted to cover a couple of things after what you've heard from these folks. The fire in the last 3 days is made a tremendous push. Really, the last 48 hours, about a little over 10 miles that the fire has progressed. And while doing that, that spread our resources fairly thin. When we get on these 3 distinct heads that were running on the fire, we put the resources where the most value is at risk. In operations, you heard them talk about the defensive posture and the importance of putting them in the right spot. So one of the things that I want to highlight with that is the situation that we're in nationally. And I know that it's been talked about before, and I'll cover that again. So we're in a planning level 5 nationally, and they prioritize all these incidents across the board. And it's part of our job to be an advocate for getting the resources that we need to put them on the fire's edge. And it's even with some of our best efforts, sometimes we're not as successful as we'd like to be to have everything that we have. So we reached out to the partners, and you heard operations talk about that. Through Colorado State, DFPC, and through emergency management, we asked for resources, and the communities in and around the Front Range and Eastern Colorado stood up to the plate and sent multiple engines here so that we could get more resources in the field to help us in protecting those structures. And that work is continuing to go ongoing into the evening. We're continuing to hold what we have and improve as the fire continues to make its push with these winds that we've had. Another thing that I wanted to address is you saw a drop in containment of the fire. That is not due to a loss of any containment lines. That's just the math of as the fire continues to progress and get larger, that percentage of containment is going to go down a little bit. We haven't gained any more on that, but those lines are still intact in those areas. The other thing that I wanted to do is talk to you a little bit about the organization. So as the fire made its progress into Rocky Mountain National Park and had the potential to get into that basin above Estes Park, we had an incoming incident management team that we were planning on moving into this area, and because the black team that's been here for quite some time, 14 days, was timing out as far as that time. We've extended the black team, and we've moved the Southwest team. It's Dave Gesser and his Type 2 incident management team is over in that Estes Park area. And so that's what the organization looks like. We've extended the black team that's on the north end of the fire, and the south end, which is just Estes Park, Rocky Mountain National Park. They will be dealing with that area. In particular, looking at all the structures, assessing what the needs may be as the fire continues to progress that way. I'd like to introduce Dave, and he's prepared to introduce himself and talk about what they've got going on over on that part of the fire right now.
Hey, good evening. I'm Dave Gesser, Incident Commander with the Southwest Area Team 3. We're just got embedded today, getting things up and running. Our major focus right now is our divisions have been out in the field and are still out in the field, assessing the communities and the surrounding areas. We worked closely today with Darla Seidels, the Rocky Mountain National Park Superintendent, to look at some of the infrastructure and things within the park as well. We also did talk about enclosing all the trails north of the 34. So they're in there currently trying to get those notifications out to folks that may be up in there camping. Just with the progression of the fire, looking at, getting those folks out of there. We are working very closely with Larimer County Sheriffs. Appreciate all their support and help that's been in there with working with some of them voluntary evacuations. So we have been really setting up some management action points in there that will trigger some of those mandatory evacuations if we do get to that point. So we are getting resources in at this time. We will, assess and get those folks seated where they need to be at within the fire area. We are here to assist the NEMO team with B-Day and them kind of zoning this fire out as they talked about with the north and south zone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. So the first question that we're going to have tonight is going to be for our operations section chief. Question is, what additional resources have brought in within the last 12 to 24 hours?
Okay, thank you. We've had a number of resources showing up over the last 12 to 24 hours. Again, the biggest surge was the mutual aid assistance from the Front Range, a number of fire departments from Denver to Boulder on up. I wish I had the full list because it was a real testament to folks standing up. But so that was roughly 50 engines. Again, we had a strike team and a task force on loan from the National Forest through this period. And then we've had a number of additional resources that we already had on order through the normal system that have arrived and checked in today. I don't have the exact count, but I know we've received an additional hotshot crew, some miscellaneous equipment, engine water tender type stuff. So we are receiving equipment and additional firefighting resources throughout the day. But the biggest pulse was the mutual aid assistance we received from the local fire departments.
Okay, the next question is going to be for the sheriff. It's going to be a two-part question. How long do you expect all mandatory evacuations to be in place? And is there a plan for Loveland? And does Loveland need to plan to evacuate? And also the same question with Fort Collins and LaPorte.
Let me address the second half of the question first. We have no plans for any of those communities, Fort Collins, Loveland, any of those. Essentially what happens is you're running out of fuel before you get there. The forest fuel is what's bringing it forward. So we see nothing in talking with our fire management folks that there's any concerns as far as that. As far as the mandatory evacuations, I wish I could give you an answer. It's a very legitimate question, and I understand the concern. It will be driven by how the fire behaves and what weather we get in. Obviously, the significant change is putting everybody in a different position, and as soon as we can safely start rolling those back, we will. But as we proved just a few days ago, despite the best efforts and the plans of rolling back the ones along Poudre Canyon and Pengrey Park just a Thursday afternoon, within a day and a half, we had to rescind those. So at this point, we don't have answers. As soon as we do, we will be sharing that information. It does go out, and I remind people to get into nocoalert.org. If you haven't put your devices, your phone, et cetera, in there tied to your address, please do that now, so you'll be notified almost immediately when those change.
Okay, the next question, and be patient with us and our technology that we've been using. Our next question is going to go to Darla Seidels from Rocky Mountain National Park. She's on Zoom. Question is, I know I see Our Deputy IC Chuck Russell already explained that we have a team going down to Rocky Mountain National Park. But the question is, it seems like there's no protective measures in the park. And what is going to be taken? And are we going to have to rely on snow and rain to put the fire out there?
Yeah, so that team did get set up today that Dave was just talking about, the Southwest team from the Southwest Team 3. And so they're just getting established today, and their operations folks are getting out on the ground with our staff and looking at all of the possible places that it could come into the park. So we are, as Dave mentioned, looking at establishing those management action points, which would be essentially the trigger points where we would take action. And so as far as strategy and tactics, I don't have that intel right now. That would go back to our planning folks, and I think they're in the middle of kind of figuring out what that looks like. But certainly we've got a number of places that we know that we will need to take action when it gets to those places. And I don't know, Dave, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Carla. So we are, like I said, folks are in place with our divisions. They're looking at those areas now and coming up with those plans. So we are getting resources out there. You know, we did have a strike team of engines stationed over here today, depending on what fire activity was, to strategically move those resources. But we are working on that plan. We'll have folks out there again tomorrow really looking at that and establishing, you know, where those areas can be and what makes the most sense to be able to take aggressive actions as things approach. Depending on what fire activity was, to strategic.
All right, thank you. The next question is going to be for our incident meteorologist, and I think this is actually could be answered by both ops and our IMET. Is it snowing yet, and what kind of impact is the snow going to have on the fire?
All right, thanks for the question. So the snow has not started yet. It's probably not going to start in earnest until late tonight into tomorrow morning. Could see a few flakes start falling after midnight, but we're looking at about a 6 a.m. Tuesday through 4 p.m., 3 p.m., something like that's going to be our heaviest snowfall. We're going to see some lingering snow showers that go through the day on Wednesday, but the main accumulating snow will be tomorrow. I will pass it off to our fire behavior analyst here to talk about the impacts.
Yeah, very good question, and we all have that. So this cold front has already changed our fire environment. So we had a very dry, very windy, just a situation that would allow fire to spread. Just the fire could build its own intensity, spot out ahead of itself, and that heat would just help perpetuate itself. So already the cold front has come in and replaced that air mass with this more humid, different wind direction, and that's already taken heat out of the environment. So as now we'll start getting precipitation, and that's going to do a couple of things. It will cool what's already on fire, so it begins to cool that off and diminish the possibility for it to move. It also moisten up the fuels that have not yet burned and are adjacent to it. So those two things act on it. Now, those are what help park the fire. So early on now, we're just coming off of 100-degree weather on the plains here. So everything is warm based up on that. So we're going to have this snow early on melting as it falls. And that's still good because that it's going to penetrate, it's going to stay around, it's going to stay cool and not evaporate rapidly. So, and as we get that much snow, it'll actually begin to accumulate on that and be cold enough so that it can persist for a little while. So we can look for several days. It's hard to say because we don't know quite how warm it's going to get after the front moves through, but several days of the fire being where it's at spatially. It's just going to be parked for a while. The concern we've got is that, you know, fuels can hold heat, a stump can burn down and hold heat for some time, and we'll just have to be diligent and be looking for those as that fire, as it dries back out, and that could reemerge.
Thank you, Boyd. Next question is going to be for the sheriff. How will people know if their houses are still standing or burned? I know people have seen on our story map where the fire perimeter goes through areas where homes are, and they want to know how they're going to be contacted.
As far as the notifications, first we have to get damage assessment teams in to confirm, and they'll look over property records and go through that. In previous fires, we've had the ability to bring people together and meet and individually share that information. Given the environment with COVID, I don't know that's going to be the case. And I believe with the technology, we've talked to the team about the ability to put those addresses out that way. Again, the preference is to be able to catch up with folks, but we also don't want to significantly delay it. So I continue to watch between the page that the team has and Larimer County's page. And as soon as we work out the best method to get that to you, that information will go out. But we're still trying to get through that now.
Thank you. Next question is going to be about structure protection and the pumps and hoses that have been set up for structure protection. What are you guys doing for those with the freezing temperatures coming tonight? Have those been addressed?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's a number of actions, not just the pumps and hoses, you know, just even our engines. We do have to take winterization steps to get those ready for the cold temperatures. So yeah, those activities are going on. You know, the hose lathes will have to drain the pumps and the hoses, as well as some of the engines, and get them winterized for this next 24-hour period where we're down in the 20s. So as long as the water's flowing, we'll be okay and they won't freeze. But as soon as we shut them down, we're gonna have to winterize stuff.
Thank you. Our question is going to be for our deputy incident commander. And we've had several questions about typings of incident management teams. And the question we've gotten is, at what point will this become a type 1? And if you can explain a little bit about what Team Black is and what the NEMO role is.
So we are a type 1, we are a type 1 incident management team. And underneath the type 1 incident management team, we have the 2 type 2 incident management teams that are in support of this fire. What determines the type of incident management team that we put in place is the complexity of the incident and the capacity to accomplish the workload that's in front of us. And with the values at risk, the size of the fire, that's why we have the structure that we have in place. Nationally, once again, back to availability of incident management teams, that is getting restricted. So there's a possibility that the incident management team complexity could change on this incident, but right now it is a type 1 incident. B-Day is a type 1 incident manager, and she has the delegation of authority for this incident, with the 2 type 2 incident management teams underneath working for her.
Thank you. The next question is going to be about power shutoffs. Do we know if power has been shut off, and if it's been shut off, where?
Best to answer that, and I don't have the probably the most updated information. Power is shut off up the 14 corridor in Pingree. We did shut some of it off early yesterday. We had to do an additional shutdown today, which encompassed some of the Highway 14 corridor, particularly around the fire station. We lost power there, and a little bit off to the east of that. And maybe, Sheriff, do you have any additional info?
Yeah, just a little bit on that. I believe what I heard when I was up there, that it was basically from Poudre Canyon Station number 2 in that rustic area. Further up, I know there was talk of some damaged poles beyond there that they were seeing. So I know definitely there. There was also some other outages around Redfeather. Our radio tower on Kilpecker lost power. It has backup power. And I don't know the reasoning for that, but I know they said by around 8:30 this evening, they anticipated whatever lost power for us. And that comes out of the Redfeather area. So I'm not aware of any other outages in that area, but I know there's at least a limited one.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we've been working as best as we can to keep the power on as long as we can, and only shutting it off when we have to. And again, that's a risk of down poles and down wires for our folks, and they're working around those structures. So that's why we're shutting it down.
And I do have one more question for you, and I'll speak it here. So the question is about fixed wing aircraft, and people have noticed that the multi-mission aircraft has been flying, giving us infrared flights. Can you talk about why we're not seeing a lot of fixed wing air tankers, or are we seeing them? And what's the difference?
Okay, yeah. So on the aviation side, we have a lot of aircraft assigned to the incident, a lot of Type 1 helicopters, as well as our helicopter coordinator and our air attack platform, which is a fixed wing. In addition to that, we've been using the multi-mission aircraft from the state of Colorado. They have 2 aircraft. We've actually been using them in rotation to have continuous coverage. As far as the conditions today, both our helicopter coordinator made multiple attempts to get up, as well as our air attack. And the conditions with the wind, the turbulence, were not conducive to low level flight. It's just not safe, whether it's fixed wing or rotorcraft. Trying to drop retardant, as well as flying the rotorcraft aircraft at low elevation just was not a safe operation. The advantage we have the multi-mission aircraft is it can provide us excellent intelligence from high elevation, where they can get out of that low level turbulence and reduce that risk. Still not a good ride for them, pretty bumpy. So those guys have really done a lot for us today in probably some very uncomfortable conditions.
Thank you. So our next question is going to be for the sheriff. What advice do you have for those who are not evacuating?
Anyone in those evacuation zones, that's based on the expertise of the fire folks and your local officials, fire department and your sheriff, that the danger is definitely there. So we advise everyone in those zones that we can reach, and we go out on the original voluntary evacuation and make a point to stop at every address that's out there and share the evacuation order that's there. And again, those are done for your own safety. So we strongly encourage anyone in those evacuation zones to put together the things that are critical and go ahead and move out. So that's our simple, basic recommendations.
Thank you, Sheriff. The next question is going to be for operations again. This is going to be status of containment lines. So we have questions about the Comanche, Kilpecker secondary line outside of Crystal Lakes and Redfeather. Do you have the status of that containment line?
So that's probably the most dynamic part of the fire here at late in the evening. So this finger that developed late in the afternoon and actually spread very rapidly is approaching that Kilpecker line. I don't have the updated intel if it's met it, if it's crossed it, but that is one of our concerns. So this was one of the primary lines, but we do have alternative and contingency lines in this area. And again, as the conditions were changing, as that frontal passage was coming in and slowing down the fire behavior, is right as it was nearing that line. So we don't have the updated intel on that yet.
Thank you. And so I'm going to use the map to ask this next question, and it's going to go over to Rocky Mountain National Park. And the fuels here in the park, in between these two, what we call fingers here, can you talk about the vegetation that is in this area here? Is it tundra or is it more mixed conifer fuels? Do you want to answer that, Boyd?
Yeah, I can too. Actually,
Yeah, so
that looks
we're
like
seeing a
that's
year where
good-
fire is burning in an ecosystem that rarely sees fire. These high elevation spruce fir forests, fire is a part of that ecosystem, but it's on a very long interval, on the order of centuries. So it doesn't happen very often, and yet when it does, it's at a time that it's going to burn aggressively and burn pretty big, and it's going to find the fuel. And if, you know, the way it burns is there's ladder fuels, there's limbs all the way to the ground. Those burn, it throws embers in, and they land and they start new fires. And so it moves that way, and it finds fuel, and it follows what can be fairly narrow stringers of fuel up there. And that's what we're concerned about, the path that that fire would be able to find to move through those high elevation areas. So the one one of the ones we're concerned about, kind of the primary one, is that it's the South Fork of the Poudre that goes up towards the visitor center, the Lookout at Trail Ridge, and actually accesses, that's got some timber that actually goes through a little pass into the Big Thompson side. So it's a discrete area. It would take a certain set of conditions for that to happen. Those might be pretty rare climatologically and even practically, but yet we're in the kind of a year where those things are happening. So it's not out of the question. We're going to be watching things closely. We've got people, our long-term analysts are just trying to answer questions like that with their fire behavior calculations and running models. So that might not be the only place. If we had an aerial image, I could point out others, but that's kind of the primary one that we're looking at.
Boyd, I sometimes forget your extensive knowledge of fire behavior in this area, so thank you for that. The next question is going to be for the sheriff. And the question is, are the mandatory evacuation areas secured? We've had a few property owners that are worried after they've evacuated.
Thank you. That's a good question. And it's one of the reasons, it's the dual part of having the roadblocks up there is to make strong efforts that other folks don't get into the area. That is one of the challenges, is we don't physically drag everybody out. So if there's folks that are held behind, that means there are others. Hopefully those are your neighbors up there. But in addition to having the roadblocks, we do manage roving patrols in the areas that we can safely do that. We've done that in other fires. Not to say there's not a risk, but in previous fires, we've had minimal instances of property thefts and other things going on within the fire, but we continue to put folks up in there to patrol and keep an eye out.
Thank you, Sheriff. The next question is probably for our operations. And this is actually going to be the operations for Rocky Mountain National Park. And so we'll try to get our technology going for you guys again. The question is plans for containment or deterrent as fire moves toward the Mummy Range.
Folks aren't in here right now, but they are looking at those areas pretty extensively. As I said, we took a hard look at things today, And that was one of the reasons with the trail systems that were going in there north of the 34, we wanted to shut that stuff down in there as well and try to get those folks out of there. They are been in looking at the McGraw Ranch area pretty well in there as well. But they are looking at those plans and building that plan at this time.
Okay, so the next question is going to be for our operations here. If conditions are good over the next few days, can fire retardant be dumped on cabins and houses to protect the houses and focus more on the north of Highway 14?
Yeah, so over the next couple days, I think we are going to have the conditions that we can start looking at using aircraft. We did set up the mobile retardant base with the ability to use the rotor wing aircraft to utilize retardant for structure protection needs. So that is certainly an option on the table and a tool in the toolbox. So I don't want to commit to that. It depends on what the fire is doing and where it ends up in the evening, but that's certainly an option that would be looked at. So, like I said earlier, the weather is going to give us the opportunity to go back on the offensive and really get ready for this next drying trend. We know the snow's not going to put the fire out. We just don't have a crystal ball to see what's coming long range yet. So we'll be back on the offensive, starting tomorrow and building those plans and looking at that. So yeah, I'd say aviation use and certainly retardant is on the table.
Okay, so the next question again for operations. The statement is totally understand why defense has been primary strategy to this point due to terrain, safety, and behavior. What would an offensive attack look like and what conditions would allow for such an attack?
Okay, thanks. That's a good question. So it really depends on where the fire parks itself, and we're still waiting for that to happen. So, we have certain parts of this fire that are in fuel conditions that it is just not safe for our firefighters to work in. It's dense bug kill. We just can't put folks in there, and we know that, and we know we're still going to be dealing with some of that on the fire, particularly up here on the north side. That's where we have those indirect control lines, and that's why we had to go out there in the first place. We have other areas though over here on the east side where it's moved into the old High Park fire scar. That's potentially an area where we can work direct, probably with some firefighters. So these are some of the options we're going to be looking at here over the next day as we see where this fire stops. So some of it could be a direct action with hand crews. Other areas could be direct actions with mechanized equipment. The other option is that indirect control feature that we have out there where depending on where the fire is, the idea is to get as tight as we can on that, but we may have to do some indirect firing operations to fully secure that. We also have what remains of the 14 corridor and tying this off. And that's another area where we may have to look at the potential to use fire to tighten that up and secure that. It's not an option to go up on that ridge line and build line up there. It just is, there's no safe way to do that. So we'll be looking at that over the next couple of days. And again, it really just depends on where the weather parks this fire and what options it gives us.
John, the next question is going to go back to the South team in Rocky Mountain National Park. So that question is, we're getting a lot about the threat to Estes Park and what the plans are for protecting Estes Park.
Yeah, so at this time, they have set up that management action point in there within the park so that as fire hits that, they will be looking at that mandatory evacuation. But they are currently looking at the area, looking at the burn scar from 2012 and looking at the options in there and seeing what they can do to start building some kind of defensible space there as well.
Thank you. Next question is going to be for the Forest Service. Please help us understand, why does the Forest Service do or do not do to manage fuels before a fire occurs, and why?
Sure. Actually, I might talk over the map. Sorry, I'm going to make the camera. We actually, I know it doesn't feel like that today, but we actually do put a lot of thought into fire before fires happen. And there's a lot of pre-planning that's actually being utilized right here in this incident. For example, one of the things we've been working on with a lot of our partners is something called potential operational delineations. And it starts with a computer exercise where we look at the fuels and we look at the terrain and get an idea of where it might be a good place to put in line. And then we sit down with our partners and the folks that know the area really well, folks like Boyd, folks like DFPC and the Sheriff's Department, and those folks who've been fighting fire in this area, and they kind of validate or question some of those potential operating delineations. So some of the lines that you're seeing built up around Redfeather in particular are a result of that exercise. So I'm really pleased that we were able to provide some strategic thinking in advance of the incident and get those lines constructed more quickly. Other work that we're doing here is fuels work. Many of you, if you've seen me at a public meeting before, a lot of times it's because we've been talking about fuels treatments we're doing. Our overall strategy is actually to build an interconnected ribbon of treatments that goes from north to south and tries to prevent runs exactly like what we're seeing today. So we have lots of projects we've been doing. We have a number of tools in our toolbox for that. We have thinning, we have prescribed fire, which you've seen us doing a lot over the last few years. And we try to connect those treatments to do exactly what you saw in Hyde Park today, which is the fire behavior changed when it got into that fire scar. Now, fuels treatments don't stop fire, they simply change that behavior. But that is something that we are looking at. Actually, where the fire moved through today was a project that we were planning, and we're gonna have to look at changing that now that we've had fire in that area. But I can assure folks that live in the area, we're looking at a lot of different ways to connect. There's a group called the Northern Colorado Fireshed Coalition that's looking at projects across all lands and across the whole landscape. Because we don't want to just treat on national forest lands, we also want to treat on private lands and state lands and try to make those treatments and reduce that fire behavior so that we have fewer events like this. Thanks.
Next question is going to be for the sheriff. If we're in voluntary evacuation areas, can we leave and return to the home?
The voluntary evacuation zones, that is accurate, yes. We do not prohibit people from returning to the area. That's simply the area we're making the recommendations. The challenge being that if you've left, there is the potential, if it goes to a mandatory, that roadblocks will have been set up. And so if the change occurs, you cannot get back in. So we remind people, if you're involuntary, pets, livestock, medicine, critical things, if you're going to be out, make sure you've taken care of getting those things out of the area, because it becomes extremely difficult if we go into mandatory. With that said, as we have been today with these extensive evacuations, we've worked with property owners, especially when they have animals, pets, livestock, to find a safe way to get them back into those areas. Obviously, we're very concerned, and we understand your concern, about your animals, and so we've been working on that. And as we can make exceptions in some of those areas, at times when fire behavior is such that it's safe to do, we'll try to do escorted moves back in to get certain critical things, but that can't be broad and can never be a promise. We'll do the best we can. And as we've seen before, fire behavior, especially in the afternoons, gets more active. So as a general rule, because we're far from done with this, if you've got those kind of requests in a mandatory zone, it's best to look early in the day to reaching out to us and see if it's possible.
Thank you, Sheriff. We've gotten a number of questions about the freezing temperatures in our firefighters. And a lot of folks would like to know what we're going to do for the firefighters that are out there tonight in the snow and the freezing weather.
Okay, thanks. So all of our firefighters, we had some discussions with what the best options were. And surprisingly, a lot of them are going to stay out. There's a number of folks that are going to stay. We do have some accommodations for those that did not want to, but we gave them the option. And so, you know, there are some options, housing out at the line. There's some options for housing down here to get them out of the cold. But, you know, freezing temperatures aren't uncommon for us. You know, we do deal with late season fires pretty regularly. So, you know, a lot of our crews, it's not comfortable, but we'll get through it. And it is going to be short lived, and it will start to warm back up. So, you know, our folks will be hunkered down tomorrow if they're waiting to see if the road conditions are safe to use. A lot of them will probably warm up in the trucks and do that type of stuff, but a lot of them will stay out on the line the next several days.
Thank you. So with that, that brings our meeting to an end. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We've had a lot of questions about what folks can do for our firefighters and what folks can do to help us here out on the fire. I'd like to first say thank you to the community. Community is amazing, and we've had a lot of offers for assistance, volunteers, donations, those kinds of things. Our firefighters do have everything that they need to be self-sufficient. If they have needs, we will get the food to them, we'll get supplies to them, anything they need. We will get that to them. What we do recommend is for you guys to support your own community. You have a lot of people that were evacuated today. I know the Red Cross has been helping. You can donate to the Red Cross, and you can donate to some of your local shelters and the folks that are helping your community. There's been a lot of people out of their homes today, and some folks who probably need some assistance. So thank you for the community. Thank you for all of the request to give donations. And with that, thank you for attending.